it's interesting to note when we talk about protecting from volatile markets, and a lot of it's been kicked up this year with 2022's inflation and supply chain issues and all those kind of things. If you just look past the 40 years, we've gone through a lot of these crises before. Hey everyone, and welcome to Make Your Money Matter. I'm your host, Brad Barrett. I'm a managing director and partner here at One Capital Management, and I'm here each and every week to remind you that your money matters. And today on the Make Your Money Matter show, we're gonna be talking about how to protect or how to understand, both logically and emotionally, to work through market volatility. And by the way, not just market volatility, but also economic volatility. But before we do, make sure to smash the subscribe button and hit the notification bell so you don't miss a single episode. All right, let's get into it. So if the recent stock market swings and the volatility and this downturn we've been experiencing so far in 2022 has left you a little anxious and nervous, we've been talking a lot about it with our clients here at One Capital and on the Make Your Money Matter show here. If you've been watching the previous few episodes, we've been talking a lot about market volatility. But this week's episode about how to protect your investments, or said differently, what to look at during market volatility and during market downturns, was actually largely inspired by a conversation, believe it or not, I had with my 6-year-old son, Brooks. He's actually 6.5. He tells me every day, right now his birthday's in December. And like many of you with kids and grandkids, keeping a child occupied during the summer is a full-time job. And thank the Lord for summer camps, at least the really good ones that aren't crazy expensive. And through camps and other items we've been doing with Brooks and with our daughter, Kate, he gets grouped in these camps with certain age groups. So he was a kindergartner and he's going into first grade. And in these summer times, our kids, they start knowing and playing and understanding their next peers and their friends. And so the other day, he comes home from camp and we were having this conversation that night. We were eating some dinner and he was opening up to us and talking to us about first grade. And this is the first time really Veronica, my wife, and I were really understanding and hearing from him, which I thought was really cool. And so we're trying to honor the conversation. And what I realized from that, what came from that conversation, dawned on me. Think about it. First grade in particular is kind of wild. We're learning how to be a human, to write things down, how to manage our relationships and follow the rules. And all the while, everyone's teeth around you, including my son's, are falling all out of place. Now, many of you looking right now are kind of going like, why is this guy talking about teeth falling out? And I know many of us who are growing up know that's a fact of life, but when you're 6 years old, you don't realize it. You're going, okay, I have to do all this stuff, but my teeth are falling out. So we have all of these things happening all the time. And it's funny, right? In first grade, and Brooks is sharing this while also mixing and mashing his words. So we're trying to piece it all together. And 6-year-olds' conversations aren't exactly the most coherent. So as we're trying to tag the pieces together in this emotional discussion, he's trying to have about what his fears are about what's going on, both within his body with his teeth falling everywhere, as well as everything that's going on with the camp and with life. And it's an interesting dichotomy of trying to understand what first grade is gonna be like for him, because it's no longer kindergarten or preschool. And I told Veronica that night, I'm like, the same emotions that many of us adults have when it comes to things we once had secured and in place are now changing. And not only changing, it's like the thing going from kindergarten to first grade for us, it's like going into a new season of life or having a child or selling a house or maybe moving houses or paying a house off, maybe putting kids through college, like all of these different things that are going on, but doing all of those things while also, in my son's case, your teeth are falling out. I mean, you're going into first grade, or for somewhat seemingly like the floor is falling out from under us, kind of feels like where the market's at right now. So I want to talk a little bit about that. And this was born from a conversation with my 6-year-old about him going from kindergarten to first grade and losing all his teeth, and discussing the idea of protection around your investments of a market downturn. So we're going to go through a couple things. And in kicking this conversation off for today's show, I want to talk about some questions that I think many of you watching and listening right now are probably thinking about, maybe talking with your advisor about, hopefully. But these are some questions that I've noticed coming up pretty regularly over the past 6 or 7 months within clients. They're going, Brad, how do we adjust our investment or retirement plan during these unpredictable times? Many of you might be thinking about the same thing. We're going to talk about that today. Another one is, how do we deal with uncertain times? Like just in general, how do we deal with those? Like what are we supposed to be thinking? And I'm gonna talk a lot about that in my third topic I'm gonna mention today around some of the things I've experienced over 20 years of being an advisor. I'm gonna hit on that second question. And then the other one that's been coming up is the overall market going to be like this forever? Is it gonna be like this for at least the next 3, 6, 9, 12, 18 months? Is it gonna be this seesaw? And I wanna start off by saying something very openly. We fear, people, you and I, human beings, we fear being heavily influenced by events beyond our control. Like that's just psychology 101, right? We don't like what we don't understand. We don't like what we cannot control. So in order to start this conversation off, when you talk about portfolio management, in particular around money of the items you cannot control, we need to develop, and you should be developing a strategy, an investment portfolio, and ultimately a financial plan that focuses on the things you can control while protecting the things that you cannot control. I think that's really a paramount beginning point when you talk about how to protect and manage through a market downturn. And the first thing I want to focus on is that last part I just mentioned, risk. Defining your risk. When someone comes into my office, calls in from the radio show, calls in from our Make Your Money Matter show, or a prospective client or referral, one of the main things that comes up is understanding their fear. We all have a healthy fear of life. That's what keeps us alive, right? But when it comes to the market, we kind of blankly just say, I don't like the market. And we typically don't like, as I mentioned before, what we don't understand. A great case in point, a social studies item to look at is, when's the last time you went to a party by yourself and enjoyed yourself? You don't know anybody, you walk in, it's kind of awkward and weird. No one actually enjoys that, right? Because we don't understand who's there. We don't have things predicted. We haven't been there before. It's not familiar. And so a lot of those emotions kick up around our money. So focusing on your risk matters a lot when you have this whole conversation about how to protect and manage through a market downturn. Because one of the things we actually can control is the level of risk we have in a portfolio. So let me start off with this and defining risk. And each one of us should do that, as I mentioned. When you talk about risk, when someone comes in and say, I don't want to be too risky or I'm risk adverse. Okay, well, what kind of risk? Because there's more than just market risk. There's interest rate risk, there's credit risk, there is business cycle risk, there's economic risk, political, geopolitical risk, inflation risk. I mean, there's a lot of different risks out there. Defining your own risk and what actually is keeping you up at night matters a lot to how you build your portfolio, how you are defining your goals and objectives as it relates to your investments, whether that's in your IRA, your 401k, a trust account, a brokerage account, an individual or joint account, doesn't really matter in that regard, but defining your risk and how you manage your assets matters for your why, because why you do what you do with your money matters a whole ton in terms of how you are growing it. Risk 30 years ago meant opportunity to many. Risk nowadays means fear. Why? Large part of that has to do with media. We, in the past 30 or 40 years in particular, have had more information come at us every day, whereas before it was not as readily available. And I relate it to this. Two main asset classes that many of us have, real estate and investments. If you thought about it for a second, and Warren Buffett talks a lot about this too, if your house or any rental property you might have traded like a stock, you'd have more anxious feelings and nervous feelings around your house than you do right now, because it doesn't trade like a stock. But if you look at it like a stock and understand that it's going to fluctuate in value, you can then take that same methodology and use it for the stock market, because we tend to not like it because it moves, it's volatile, but so does your real estate. It just doesn't do it every day, and you're seeing it on your phone or in the news channels across the board. So the news that's been coming at us tells our brain that, hey, our brain was designed by God to protect us, not necessarily to enhance our life, but to protect us. That's somewhat psychology 101 in a way, where it's like it was designed to do that for a reason. And it's great to do it that way. But if you think about the past 40 years, let's just talk about that outside of just risks. What has happened in the past 40 years? We've gone through 6 recessions, 5 bear markets, 41 federal rate hikes, a dot-com bubble, Black Monday in the 80s, 2 50% stock market crashes. We've gone through 12 plus US involved wars, a global pandemic. We've had impeached presidents, the great financial crisis of '08. That was all in 40 years. So it's interesting to note when we talk about protecting from volatile markets, and a lot of it's been kicked up this year with 2022's inflation and supply chain issues and all those kind of things. If you just look past the 40 years, we've gone through a lot of these crises before. Now, one thing that wasn't on that list that's interesting is inflation, something we talk heavily about here, and why we need to look at that over the next 5 or 10 years in particular, because that's going to matter for any of those clients that are feeling really anxious about investing and in their 401k and in their IRA. And it kicks up the one point I want to make here, and I'm going to get into a couple that I want to go through of my 18 years, almost 20 years of doing this, that I've noticed. And this is going to be more Brad speaking from the heart as an advisor. This isn't necessarily financial advice for everybody. Please, seek counsel and go through this with your advisor. If you'd like to use us as well, you can reach out to us. Our number will be at the bottom of the screen here. But the point I want to get is a couple things. One is cash. I think more often than not, when we have volatile markets or a market downturn, our brain, again, which is designed to protect us, not enhance our life necessarily, but to protect us, wants us to go to cash. It says, okay, well, just get out. Well, here's what I have to say about that. If you go to cash, you have to be smart twice. You have to know when to get out and know when to get back in. And the last thing you want to do is sit on the sidelines. Now, I know you hear me say this pretty much every week, and Veronica, my wife, thinks it's going to be on my headstone. I say it so much. She tells me that pretty much weekly. But it's not about timing the market, but time in the market. So it's not necessarily about market timing and trying to say, okay, I'm just going to sit on the sidelines until this administration's out and the next one comes in, or until China opens back up because they have a zero COVID policy right now, or whatever it might be. We need to make sure that we understand the plan and stick with discipline and discernment and really find good management. Because finding, and I relate this a lot to financial advisors and good investment managers, is a lot like a Sherpa, someone who's will help you navigate the crazy terrain in a place like the Himalayas, but they've been around and they've been experienced and they know what's around the corner. Like, no one has a crystal ball, neither do we, but we can forecast and look out and protect because we've gone down these roads before. And you're going to design your road. You're going to design your goal and your destination, because a lot of times when I meet with clients, I'll ask them a simple question that many can't answer. Why? Why are you investing this way? Well, I like this company, or I like that stock, or, I own this, so I figured it's probably got to be a good investment, right? But that's not really the why. Why are you investing? Why are you taking on that specific risk within that investment? There's a reason for it. We got to dig into that and really make sure that that's what we want long-term, because it does matter when we focus on those things. So when you talk about cash, the point number one I want to make is, focusing on cash and our brain telling us, hey, we need to move to cash because, markets are volatile, that may not be the right move. And arguably, if you look at the last 20, 30, 40 years, it really wasn't, because you look at that same time period, the markets have been up. We just got to get through the thick. We don't want to lose the forest through the trees, right? Number two, I'll bring up is something I've experienced is you want to make sure you review your asset allocation. Like, you want to make sure you understand what's in your portfolio with your advisor, at least semi-annually, if not at least annually, because what you set as a course and what the advisor is doing and the investments are in there and how they're managing it matters. Making sure they're being rebalanced, making sure they're being actively traded. So when you see things go down, volatility in this market downturn can be a really good friend to you if you know what you're looking at and you know what you're looking for. I relate it like this. It's a bad analogy. I've used it before, but it's like a car. Every one of us typically has a car. You look at a windshield or the paint, the windshield's cracked, the paint's rusted, the tires are bent, but it still runs. People will look at it and say, I don't want that car. That car's dead. For us, what we care about is the fundamentals of a company. We're going to be the ones looking under the hood and saying, hey, look, this engine still is good. Yeah, it's got some dents, it's got some scratches. We got to fix that. It's the same way we relate what's going on in the economy. We have some headwind. We have inflation risk. We definitely have a recession kind of looming in a way, depending on what happens here with the Fed. We have interest rates rising, which is going to kind of curtail the growth of the economy. But that's not going to be forever. And we need to understand it's what we can buy in those time periods, because opportunity exists. You just got to be able to find it. So number two is reviewing your asset allocation pretty consistently with your advisor. You really want to make sure you focus on that. And three, and I talk about this a lot, getting back to the psychology of money, is you don't want to make decisions based solely and mostly on emotions. It can be an easy trap for us to fall into when we feel our brain tells us that our financial future is at risk. And I think many of you, and why I wanted to write this show today, really are feeling that. And my son, as I mentioned earlier in the show, was feeling that too. Now, he's trying to control his life, show up to camp, enjoy himself, learn all the things he has to learn. And all the while, him and all his buddies, their teeth are just falling out. Like, it's a crazy phenomenon that we all take for granted because we've gone through it as adults. But he's like, why is this happening, Daddy? He does not understanding it. And so it was a lighthearted conversation. And I think if we bring that into our world, we had this plan coming into 2022, right? We had everything coming from 2020, 2021. We thought that was all behind us. But now we're getting hit with recession discussions. We're getting hit with inverted yields, wars abroad. We're getting hit with inflation. Like, all this stuff is hitting us, and our brain's telling us that, hey, your financial future is at risk. And you want to make sure that you, again, dive into that deeper with your advisor, with counsel, to make sure that you're not basing any investment decision, which is kind of dovetails off number one about just going to cash, just do it kind of thing. Make sure you're not doing it based solely on emotions. Because as I say often, we have two brains working at all times, our emotional brain and our logical or rational brain. And you want to make sure the emotional brain isn't winning out at all times. And I think that's the one that's the loudest voice during market downturns and during market volatility. All right, so it's time to answer your questions. If you have a question or topic you'd like me to address here on the Make Your Money Matter show, you can leave a comment or question in the comment section. Or if it's something you want to talk about a little more one-on-one, just go to the About page on our channel and you can send us an email. We'll always keep our questions we read here anonymous, and you don't have to worry about your name being shared, but we would love to hear from you. And this week's question actually came from one of the questions I read earlier. How do we deal with uncertain things that we're dealing with right now, like inflation? I want to talk heavily for those out there watching and listening around cash. If you're sitting in cash now, anything above your reserve amount, and a reserve amount, a good rule of thumb is 3 to 6 months of your overhead. So if your overhead was $10,000 a month, you should have somewhere between $30,000 and $60,000 sitting in cash. If it's above that, you really should take a look at investing that. And I don't mean that across the board for everybody. Obviously, seek with a counsel and an advisor, but you really want to look at that, because I think the biggest thing to answer this question about how do we deal with uncertain things like inflation is, inflation's a tough one because it's not tangible. We can't touch, feel, and taste it. But we definitely see it. We see it at the gas pump. We see it at the grocery store. We see it across the board in a lot of our purchases. So if we have $10,000 today in our savings account and we just sit in cash for 5 years and we're running at a 5% inflation rate over that same time period, we're down $500 every year. You won't see it as a negative, number on your cash statement, but you'll see it as purchasing power. The purchasing power of the dollar today, tomorrow. And we're seeing that right now. So I think the way we deal with uncertain things like inflation, which I know sounds crazy, but it's the time to lean in, not lean away. And I think that's important to make sure that you lean into finding your reserve amount that's right for you, and then making sure you find some growth areas that you can grow and pick up with inflation, hopefully outpace it with good management, a good advisor. So I think it's not necessarily a cure-all for everything, like a do this and you'll be fine kind of thing. Being diversified, but being growth-oriented with value allows you to make sure that you mitigate inflation risks and fears and hopefully outpace it. So I think when you talk about how to deal with uncertain things like inflation, you don't want to lean away from it, just go in cash and hide in a corner. Like, that's not, honestly, that's the opposite of what you should be doing. Find that reserve level for you to keep in cash at all times for like the uh-oh moments, but then look at the rest and make sure you're managing that. Also with cash, be careful to have too much cash in retirement accounts, because that's another area where you want to make sure that that's keeping pace with inflation and growing. Because if we are seeing 3, 4, 5% average, not currently, but average over the next 5 or 10 years, you want to make sure that your money's growing lockstep with it and hopefully growing past it. So again, if you have any questions or comments you'd like me to read here, you can leave it in the comments section, or again, email us in the About page on our channel. Now, before we go today, if you found anything helpful today and want to learn more about us, you can visit our website at onecapital.com. You can also scan the QR code that's on the screen with your smartphone and it'll get you there. You can also call or text us. Look, we want to help. There's no pressure. We don't treat people like a number. In fact, we value relationships. It's the lifeblood of what we do. So click, call, or text us today. If you're not following us on social media, you should be. We're sharing great information on all of our social media platforms. You can follow us at Make Your Money Matter. And as I often say, if you enjoy the show, share with someone you like. And if you don't like it, I guess share with someone you don't like. But until next time, always remember to make your money matter.